Here are the insiders, Pierre, LeBrun, Johnston and Darren Dreger. Gentlemen, as each day goes by, it's pretty clear the pandemic restrictions in Canada dramatically different than those south of the border. How could this impact Canadian teams moving forward, Darren?
Well, it comes down to a player decision, and the player's decision perhaps based on what his family's wants and needs are. I can tell you that Canadian club general managers, Canadian team executives will take you back to last year pre-trade deadline, where players were somewhat reluctant with trade protection to waive to come to Canadian cities, largely because of the provincial restrictions. If you're a player with school-aged children, a young family, does that come into consideration with the trade deadline on March 21st? And then you look beyond that potentially and unrestricted free agency. Now, no one can do anything about it, and who knows what the world will look like here in Canada, especially by March or in early summer, but there is a competitive slant when you talk to Canadian club executives.
Another impact, Darren, of these restrictions, particularly here in Ontario, is that the Heritage Classic outdoor game is in some degree of limbo between the Toronto Maple Leafs and Buffalo Sabres. That's scheduled for March 13th at Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton. The NHL actually has a group of staffers coming up to Hamilton this week, and so the league has to be full steam ahead in terms of its preparations, but they haven't received any indication yet from provincial authorities what the capacity limits might look like. And my sources are telling me that the league is not inclined to play this game at reduced capacity, anything less than 100%. And so as they're finalizing the outdoor games for next season, something they want done by the All-Star game, they're leaving a spot open because it's possible that Heritage Classics game is moved back a year.
Now, we're not sure if the Leafs are going to be playing outdoors in Hamilton this March, but we're pretty certain they're loving what they've seen from Jack Campbell this year. The only problem, their number one doesn't have a deal for next season. Any developments on that, Pierre?
There have not been negotiations between the two sides since the season has started. And what's interesting about that is that my sense of it is that whatever the number was that Jack Campbell's camp, led by Kurt Overhart, would have perhaps settled for before the season when there were some negotiations, that number has gone up since then. There's no question about it, because Jack Campbell is a Vezina Trophy candidate at this point so far this season. He has proven his durability so far this season, and so his leverage and his market price continues to soar. Now, a lot of people wonder about Kurt Overhart with some of his other negotiations, whether he's actually willing to negotiate during the season. We saw he used that as a pressure tactic with Mattias Ekholm, forcing an extension done right before the Nashville Predators season for that pending UFA. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case here. I think if the Leafs went back to Jack Campbell's camp with a new offer sometime here before the end of the regular season, it could spur on more talks. But the bottom line is this. It's more expensive now, I think, to sign Jack Campbell than it was before the season started.
Elsewhere, it's been almost 2 months since Jack Eichel had that experimental neck surgery. He said he was hoping to come back in 3 to 4 months. How's that timeline looking, Chris?
Well, the timeline is right on time, and Jack Eichel is progressing right now towards a point where he's expected to be in Vegas within the next week or so, officially kind of join the Golden Knights, work towards practicing with them. And there's an eye here on having him play games in February. So it's been very good news from his spot. That artificial disc replacement surgery you mentioned on November 12th went well. He's been on skates now for more than a month, and it shouldn't be too long before we're seeing him playing or practicing with the Golden Knights.
Speaking of NHL returns, Tuukka Rask signed an AHL tryout, as we know, with the Providence Bruins tryout contract on Thursday morning. And you want to talk about how the world changes quickly these days with everything COVID-related. Well, the plan was for Tuukka Rask to play a game or two this weekend with the Providence Bruins, and if he felt good and the Bruins were ready, sign into an NHL deal next week. Well, guess what? Both the Providence games have been postponed because of COVID issues with the visitors, and so no AHL games for Tuukka Rask. Now, they don't play again until January 14th. So at this point, anything is really possible. If Tuukka Rask feels good while he's practicing with Providence, maybe he just jumps right into the Boston Bruins lineup next week without an AHL tune-up. That remains to be seen.
We know NHL players are not going to the Olympics, but Dregs, could we still see them at the All-Star game?
Yeah, no question about that. But there are some players, there are rumblings of some players who are considering taking the All-Star weekend off, and they may use their concerns over COVID as part of the ammunition to defend their case for taking the weekend off. Remember, there is a policy in place. It's been there a while. The NHL can suspend the invited player who is deemed healthy one game coming out of the All-Star weekend if they do not participate. Now, there is an NHL and Players Association conference call on Friday. It is to talk about all things All-Star related. It'll be interesting to see if this item comes up.
The last NHL All-Star game that was played, January 2020, about 6 weeks before the world changed.